In this week's Parsha, I really relate to Moshe. And the way I relate to him is not in, his greatness. We know Moshe was the greatest prophet of all time. He was a Nab Mikol Adam, the most humble person that ever existed. But I relate to him in his greatest failing that occurs in this week's Parsha. And I think that many of us can. And I think that there's a really important lesson to be learned by what happens. And the story that occurs in our Parsha, as many of you are familiar with, is the story where Miriam has just passed away. There is no more water that had come from the well of Miriam. The people were thirsty, and they came to Moshe and Aaron. They complained to them about the lack of water. And Moshe and Aaron were devastated. They fell on their face. Hashem spoke to them and said, to take the staff in your hand, but to speak to the rock to bring forth water for the people. And as we know, unfortunately, Moshe did not speak to the rock with Aaron. He hit the rock, and God chastised him and said that you have not sanctified me, what you did by hitting the rock. And this we know, we're told, is the reason why he was not allowed to enter the land of Israel. Now, I think it's really important because it seems very harsh, and people, it's such a matter of great discussion and debate as to what really the sin was and why God didn't let him to go into the land because of this. But I want to put that aside and just discuss it in the way that I really relate and what was something problematic. One of the things problematic about what he did. And in order to do that, we have to understand that this is the third time that the nation had run out of water. The first two times were in the beginning of their journeys in the desert after they left Egypt. And the first time, all they did was say to Moshe, Manashta, what should we drink? We ran out of water. And then the second time, I think, is very important to look because it's when God told Moshe to hit the rock, and he hit the rock to bring forth water. And I want to compare and contrast it with what happens in this week's Parsha in order to get to the point that I'm trying to make. So, what happens, right? Um, where is it? Sorry about that. Here it is. Okay. Um, So, in English, I'm going to read it really quickly. The entire assembly of children of Israel journeyed from the wilderness of Sin in their journeys according to the word of Hashem, and they encamped in Rephidim, and there was no water for the people to drink. The people contended with Moses, and they said, Give us water that we may drink. Moses said to them, Why do you contend with me? Why do you test Hashem? The people thirsted there for water, and the people complained against Moses and said, Why is it that you've brought us out from Egypt to kill me and my children and my livestock through thirst? Moses cried out to Hashem and said, What shall I do for this people? A bit more and they will stone me. Hashem said to Moses, Pass before the people, take with you some of the elders of Israel, and in your hand take your staff with which you struck the river, and go. Behold, I shall stand before you by the rock, and you shall strike the rock, and water will come forth from it, and the people will drink. Moses did so in the sight of the elders of Israel. He called the place Ma'aseh Meribah because of the contention of the children of Israel and because of their test of Hashem, saying, Is Hashem amongst us or not? Okay, so that's what happened in Parshat Beshalach. Now let's look at the difference between that and what happened in Chukat, which I'm also going to read really quickly, and then we will discuss. Okay? The children of Israel, the whole assembly, arrived at the wilderness of Sin the first month, and the people said in Kadesh, Miriam died there, and she was buried there. There was no water for the assembly, and they gathered against Moses and Aaron. The people quarreled with Moses and spoke up, saying, If only we had perished as our brethren perished before Hashem. Why have you brought the congregation of Hashem to this wilderness to die there, we and our animals? And why did you have us ascend from Egypt to bring us from this evil to this evil place? Not a place of seed or fig or grape or pomegranate, and there was no water to drink. Moses and Aaron went from the presence of the congregation to the entrance of the tent of the meeting and fell on their faces, and the glory of Hashem appeared to them. Hashem spoke to Moses, saying, Take the staff and gather together the assembly, you and Aaron and your brother, and speak to the rock before their eyes that it shall give you water. You shall bring forth from them water from the rock and give them to drink to the assembly and their animals. Moses took the staff from before Hashem as he commanded them. Moses and Aaron gathered the congregation before the rock, and he said to them, "Listen now, O rebels, shall we bring forth water from the rock?" And this is a rhetorical question. He was saying, I gave you water before, I can give you water now. Why are you giving me problems? Okay, back to the text. Listen now, you rebels, shall we bring forth water from this rock? Then Moses raised his arm and struck the rock with his staff. Abundant water came forth from the assembly and their animals and drank. And then Hashem says to Moshe and Aaron, because you did not believe in me to sanctify me in the eyes of the children of Israel, therefore you will not bring this congregation to the land that I have given them. They are the waters of strife. The children of Israel contended with Hashem, and he was sanctified through them. Okay, so here we see the difference. Now, in the first one, in Bashalach that I read to you, you see that their complaint is very self-centered. Why did you take us out of Egypt, all of us, to kill me and my family? Already you see that they didn't have this sense of community. Everybody's worried about themselves. They didn't see themselves, as they said now in the later complaint, as Kal Hashem, as a congregation of God. And there, when they were crying and complaining, they were in a state of panic. They thought they were, just going to die, and they were still worried. They still had the slave mentality, and God cut them slack from that. And God said, "Okay, now's not a time to talk." They're in a state of panic. They needed to see the hand of God bring forth water. It was time still where they needed the miracles. So go, take the staff, and the elders and leaders, and hit the rock and bring forth water for them. And that's what happened. That's what Moshe did, and it was okay. It was according to God's plan, and everything went on from there. No punishment. But here, this was at the end, as opposed to that other time that we read, there's the beginning of their journey in the wilderness. This is at the end of their journey, when they're about to enter the land, and they show growth. They call themselves the congregation of God. They had all those years in the desert, cultivated a relationship with God. They understood that they were people of God, and their fear was now they're about to enter the land, and they didn't have water, and they knew that things were different, and they were afraid. But they were coming, they were looking for something. They said, you brought us out here in the wilderness that doesn't have seeds and fruits and stuff. And that's true. The wilderness did not have that. And they said, you just brought us and our cattle out to die in the desert. And they watched, all of them had watched their parents perish in the desert, and they were sad. It was had come to a point where it was just so much of the stress of going in, watching all their loved ones die. It was a problem. But the fact is that they showed growth. They showed that they understood now that they were a nation of God, and that they just wanted water, and they were crying out in thirst and in a desperation. And maybe they were doing it, in a way that they shouldn't have, but their word had showed progression. Their words, when they even said, if only we had died out in the desert like our brethren, as opposed to before when it says, you brought us out to kill us here in the desert. Here it was just, sometimes when things are going really hard, people just say, I wish I was dead. It was one of those. It wasn't in terms of, not believing in God's mission. They just needed a pep talk. They just needed water. And the way that they complained showed the progression. It wasn't focused on the I, that you came to kill me and my family. They didn't say that. And Moshe should have listened to the nuance and the differences in their complaint. And this is where I relate, because this is what people have a problem with a lot of times. When we've been through years of relationships with people, and something comes up, which is a same problem with a different face, right? Like here, there's no water. They've been through that before. And if we're in a relationship and we come to butt heads with the person, something that has happened in the past, automatically we we shoot back to the past and we label it as this is the same problem. This person hasn't grown at all, and it's a fear. It's the fear that we have of this problem resurfacing, reoccurring, and that we won't be able to deal with it, and that the future is so bleak. But if we pay attention to what people say and how they say it, and is there a difference? And are they saying something just because they want you to tell them otherwise? They're fishing. Sometimes people are fishing, and maybe the people were fishing when they said it's not a land of seed and pomegranate and all this. Maybe they wanted Moshe to say, "Don't worry, guys, you're almost there. You'll be there, and God's going to give you this, and God will give you everything past." They needed that pep talk. And sometimes when we argue with people, they're fishing. And you shouldn't punish them for them when they need that support. You should really hear what they're trying to say as opposed to the things that have hurt you in the past and just labeling it and yelling back. And accusing them of something that's not, because sometimes it takes people a growth process. It takes people time, and people make changes in incremental steps. And Moshe should have seen that there was a change. There was a change in the words is not the same. Words is not the same people. And God, when God told Moshe to speak to the rock, he said it in plural. Take Aaron and speak. You and Aaron are supposed to speak to the rock. That now the people have grown and they can listen, they can hear, they want to hear. This is not a time where you're supposed to hit the rock like in the past, where they weren't able to hear anything because they were just a slave nation and they just needed to see the hand of God. They've grown, they can learn, they're ready for that next step. That next step that you and Aaron together, you and Aaron, with the soft touch and the compassion for the people, if the two of you speak to the rock, it can be such a growth process. It can take the people to the next level of growth that they need to go into the land. This was an opportunity lost to sanctify God's name, to explain and to go over again everything that God had done to them, for them, and everything that God will do in the future, and to make a groundbreaking speech and sanctify God by talking to the rock. And that was an opportunity lost. And I think that I try and take that to heart, to know and to keep in mind that, if my children or friends or spouse or anybody, if I get into what seems like a tired old argument, to listen for the nuance of change, because perhaps there is growth and perhaps there is opportunity, to speak differently and to make a better future. I think that's the greatest lesson we can take from this. And I wish you all a very good Shabbat Shalom.